Dzień dobry Państwo. My name is Shumin and I'm speaking from Singapore today. Unfortunately, I won't be able to join you at the Manga Museum in person. However, seeing the stage, seeing the conference from the comforts of my workspace yesterday brought back definitely fond memories of my time in Krakow. So for today's session, I would like to share my experiences in the field of STE with you, especially seeing how this international standard can help you make the creation and management of global documentation a little bit less of a headache. So a bit about myself. I have been working with the Simplified English Standard since 2006. So that is probably a long time by now. And if you've noticed, Simplified Technical English used to be known as Simplified English. And the official name is this wonderful acronym ASD STE 100. All three to me mean the same. And we're talking about the standard based on practical experiences over the past 10 years, 10 to 16 years in many different industries. And I've also prepared some samples, some sample documents that we could review and have a look at during my presentation. So I believe that most of us here seated in the audience will recognize this type of juggling. We have your business requirements to take into account on top of your daily regular workload. Just getting the work done is not quite enough. There are various considerations such as time to market, or as the case may be, downtime. Of course, there will be occasions when you are forced as a technical communicator to cut corners and save costs wherever possible. And at the same time, you still want to be rather autonomous, rather independent of your different suppliers. So this means a continuous juggling game where we are going to try and keep everything in balance to get our projects finalized on time, within budget, and with the right quality without any further compromises. So these were the few questions that were running through my mind as I was preparing and researching for today's presentation. So whether or not you are working as a technical writer, you're part of the marketing department, overall, you would still have to take on some roles in technical communication. So how often is it that you struggle with putting brilliant content on the plate? And also, are your subject matter experts oftentimes staying back long hours in the office, churning out documents that hardly anybody reads or want to read them? And last but not least, how can you eventually simplify complex ideas and bring them forward as simplified, straightforward concepts that are often accompanied by a few deep sighs of relief, as well as long overdue aha moments? So how do we move from a train wreck of complexity to like a beautiful high-speed train of brilliance? Is a question that I hope my presentation and my sharing today will be able to answer. So what qualifies as sustainable content for you? It is the big word, it is the super word in the industry or in many different industries today. And I believe some of you in the audience would already have a few ideas or draw inspiration from the word sustainability, what it means for you as a technical communicator, and what it means for you as a technical writing team moving forward. Let's take the example of this random sentence that I picked from an IT-related piece of document. In order to perform X installation process, please ensure that all of the following steps are done. You may not be taken aback by this sentence, and it's probably manageable, digestible, and easily processed if looked at as a standalone clause. However, when the effects of voluminous text start to snowball, it becomes really hard to read, and nobody wants to read sentences like that, realizing that they still would have 20 more sentences of the same type to overcome in the following pages. So in Simplified English, we try to cut out the dead wood. We try to get rid of extra words, words that are redundant, words that have the same meaning as previously used simpler word alternative. So in this case, in Simplified English, we would say to install X, do these steps. Okay. So you see that by now, I would say from a 1, 2, 3, from a 10-word sentence, you probably would be able to shorten it to 6 words without losing any meaning, and yet at the same time delivering a higher level of clarity to your technical English sentences. So how do we get from here to the next, to STE? Before I answer that question, let's take a look at my personal definition for sustainable content from a controlled English, simplified English point of view. So controlled English is synonymous with simplified English, and I don't really, would rather not call it controlled English because it sounds very restrictive, whereas simplified English brings about a more welcoming connotation. So based on my perspective as an STE person, as an evangelist or advocate for the plain English, simplified English movement, I would say that when it comes to sustainability, you definitely do not want too many words to crowd your terminology. Do you not want that many words to be sitting in your vocabulary and tapping on different words when they all point to the same meaning, the same idea, the same concept? So if you take a look at this graph, which happens to be just a business case study, we did a comparison between 2 sets of documents that are writing about the same thing, and we did a comparison before and after writing them out in STE. So we see that the number of unique terms would have decreased by about 60 to 70%, and we're talking about a document that is really enriched with any word that you can think about when it comes to when it's related to a product that was designed for chemotherapy patients. So we were also a little bit surprised that there were so many terms that we could get rid of and represent the whole document with only just the core key terms here. And in the second set of pillar comparison, you would also see that we address translatability in this case. Obviously, there is no standard scientific, standardized, agreed way of calculating translatability. However, we do see that when it comes to translations and localization, our vendors are sending us invoices that are more manageable and invoices that do not have a shock factor. So when it comes to translatability, you will find that Simplified English promotes the uniformity of the use of words. There will be greater levels of consistency in your source text in English, and for that reason, translations become cheaper, and translation managers could come back to us with a shorter turnaround time. Also, one reason that could explain why there is a shorter turnaround time is that the translators themselves will not have to send me that many questions asking if this is the correct meaning in English and if this is accurately translated into, say, Arabic, Polish, or Japanese, for example. And of course, if we try to be more conservative in our estimate, we're looking at a volume decrease in text of about 30 to 40% in the third pillar of value comparison. So these are the different factors at interplay that would tell me that, hey, good job, Shumin. In this cycle of translations, in this cycle of technical writing, your project is sustainable because we don't have to pay too much to our vendors and we get higher match rates for our translation memory. The volume of text did decrease, and in the end, it's a win-win-win for ourselves, for our customers, and for the translation vendors, because they will get more projects in the future for work. Yeah. So we're just trying to build a win-win-win situation when we're talking about sustainable content. And I very much am leaning towards this article. I took a very strong liking for this article, which I feel that everyone should attempt to Google and read it. It's also quite entertaining. It sheds some very raw, straight-talking insights. Maybe some of the quotes from this article are bordering offensive when they take on the subject of communication. So I've decided to stay away from those offensive, slightly offensive quotes. And this is something that I very much respect. So one of the technical writers in the audience yesterday asked a question that if the work that he's doing is of great value, high quality, and yet the marketing, the distribution, the publishing of his content is not that great and prevalent, then how does one close that gap? Regardless of who ever gets to read your documents or your manuals in the future, I think that there is a general overall belief where in practice, smart people simply will accord the right amount of respect to simple language, not because they are made up of very simple to read words, but the hard work that gets behind, the hard work that people put in backstage, as with this, the same as with this conference, is that it takes a lot of hard work in the back end for technical writers to take on interesting ideas and convert them into simpler words. Simplified English is a process of unlearning the habit of using big words to hide your lack of confidence, unlearning the use of big words to hide ambiguity. And Simplified English simply forces you to use simpler words, and in the end, there is no room for sounding vague. You either would do step A or you would do step B. So that in itself is a very this quote in itself, it's a very agreeable idea and very much nicely aligns with the principles and the ethos of Simplified English writers. Okay. So let's take a step back from Simplified English and examine English, Standard English as it stands today. So people have been writers have been writing technical documents for the past 50 years, if not 100. We talked about the industrial revolutions, the first, second, and third revolutions, and regardless of how many industrial revolutions the world goes through, technical documents will always be of great relevance. It's just a matter of how we present them in different formats, in different publishing modes, different channels, how However, we need to recognize as professional communicators that technical documents are mostly written in English. I do have customers in Germany who write part-time in German, in standard German, but the trend these days is really that everything is pushed towards, geared towards English as the source text for your documentation. However, the problem with English is that it has a huge vocabulary. I'm not saying that this problem does not exist in the Slavic family of languages like Polish, Bulgarian, Hungarian, but English in itself still, it does not dismiss the fact that English in itself still is a very enriched depository of words, about 700,000 words, and couple that with complex grammar. So think about your passive voices, your complex verb tenses, even your perfect tense. So couple a rich vocabulary of words with complex grammar, and on top of that you throw in words that are redundant, words that are useless, words that do not convey any real meaning, then you do have a good melting pot of problems to anticipate as a technical writer. So that is why in the 70s, the American government recognized this potential time bomb waiting to explode. And in order to coordinate efforts to ensure that communication is loud and clear, they've adopted the plain English movement. So STE is part of the plain English movement, and plain English just happens to be the overarching umbrella term for different initiatives to simplify the language. So in the 70s, realizing that the majority of the population are of migrant people in nature, it makes a lot of sense for the American government to adopt plain English when communicating to the public how they should pay their fines, where they should go to make a bank loan, and miscellaneous things like that. So coming back, moving forward by 10 years, fast forwarding by 10 years, coming closer to home, in the early 80s, the European Association of Aerospace decided that, hey, look, so now that air travel is getting more and more prevalent and popular, and aircraft and our aircraft fly all over the world, then we would want to prioritize safety as the top goal, the top business objective. And it doesn't make sense for people, technicians in different parts of the world, to do hands-on maintenance on these aircraft without proper documents. So they would have been tightening the bolts and replacing parts based on learning on the job in their native tongue, native languages, and none of these precious knowledge and information get documented. So that was a very, very strong incentive for the EICMA Association to develop STE as the writing standard. So from then on, the rest is just history. In the early 2000s, there was just a renaming of the standard. And why did I especially include October 2006? Because that's about the time when I started, when I joined the workforce, and I started working as a terminologist, so helping customers select good words for the STE dictionaries. So back at the time when I joined, I was already witnessing a trend where, even though in the 80s you tell me that this is a standard which came from the aerospace industry, when I joined, I would say about 60% of the customers that I work with are already from outside the aerospace and defense sector. And if we're looking at 2022 today, you are probably expecting about 70% of the customers being from outside of the aerospace and defense, which highlights a very significant onboarding rate of users for the standard. And of course, here we're talking about the latest release of issue 8. that happened in May 2021, based on the hard work and efforts of the STE maintenance group. They are a group of very dedicated linguists, translators, and engineers who represent the industry, the maintenance, the repair, the manufacturers of aircraft, people who do repair and overhaul. And more recently, they had a new member joining on board from Germany who is dealing with green energy solutions. So you see that diversity going on. You see that dedication and the hard work that they put in to make sure that every 3 to 4 years we're getting a new release of simplified technical English issues. Okay, so that is more or less how STE came to be, and how exactly are we forging ahead in the path for the future, something that I also hope to address in one of my last few slides. Okay, so having said so much and shared so many wonderful benefits of the standard, I thought it would be fair of me to present you with a general definition of what STE really includes. So it is actually made up of 3 pillars. You have those writing rules, you have a general vocabulary, and you also have project-specific words, because STE will not predict any word that you plan to use in your documents 6 months from now. It's nothing like. If you had to draw a parallel between the STE standard and a beverage, whether it's a bottle of wine or a bag of tea leaves, well, I would say that STE is closer to the analogy of a bag of tea leaves, because it's not a finished product. You would still have to bring the bag of tea leaves home from Carrefour, from Galeria Krakowska, and you bring it home. You have to set the kettle on boil, and then you start preparing tea. So the project-specific words are words that you would have to come up with on your own, based on a solid simplified English training, to have the guidelines, and you apply those principles to select words for your project. And in the end, the 3 elements would gel together. You apply the rules, you make sure that there is at least a 70% to 80% compliance with the rules. What's the point of having rules if you don't intend to comply at a high level? You make use of the general vocabulary to form your generic sentences, and then you throw in those project-specific words, which has to do with your product, your branding. So all of these words in your bill of materials will have to be included in the dictionary. So tapping into these 3, making them work harmoniously, is the objective of the game of sustainable content. Okay. So I've prepared an array of technical industries examples for you today. I won't be going through them in detail unless there is extra time towards the end. I'm actually quite mindful about my time here. So we definitely work with a very diverse community of customers. They could be from the oil and gas, from mining, and also customers who build very precise instruments for measuring biological samples in the lab, and not forgetting customers who work in IT, who work in content management, who do a lot of great work in ensuring that they deliver great services and software products to their customers. So you could see that Simplified English has come a long way since the 80s, transforming into such a versatile standard that many people get to benefit from. So in the first example, I do apologize if the text looks a little bit small to read. It is talking about the alarm system that it's a customer that builds oil rigs around the world in the seas. So they would be drilling deep into the seabed to extract oil. So they would have different configurations of oil rigs built in different parts of the world. And for standard safety measures, they would always do an alarm test of the alarm system. So you need to just make sure that all the alarms in different parts of the oil rigs are working. It is a pass-fail result. It is a pass if personnel can hear the alarms loud and clear, and all the lights are working and without any problem. So this is a piece of text that's written in standard English, and I now present you with something that is written in simplified English. So what we did here is that we went in to reorganize the information so that it shows the locations accurately, and we also got rid of the difficult words like audibly or visually in all areas of the rig. So this could be a rewriting outcome that you could expect from Simplified English. And again, I would like to take this opportunity to remind the audience that you as a technical writer, you as a product manager will not work in silos. So we would often have to communicate and engage our stakeholders for our documents. So thankfully, after a coffee chat with one of the marine superintendents in the pantry, I came to the conclusion that we did not have to include the locations of different locations on the oil rig, because oil rigs are built differently around the world. Having these locations listed may not provide a comprehensive list of areas to check. So in the end, the whole paragraph was shortened to 4-line text. And if you want more information, I will refer you to the appendix. So perhaps the conference committee will be able to hand out these presentation slides to you after the conference if you're really interested, or you could just get in touch with me directly and I'll be happy to share more. So quickly moving on to the next business case study. It has to do with, of course, heavy machinery in this case. If you're thinking about a career switch from IT to heavy machinery, it's really a completely different industry, different world altogether, but the principles of writing remain the same. So if you have a two-piece tear down, it's almost like creating a new word for your documents, and Simplified English doesn't like that. If you could express yourselves in a simpler wording, like instead of a two-piece tear down, you simply remove the cutter boom, then use those simple words to make your, to drive your message across. So to remove the cutter boom, you route the chain between the cutter frame. And instead of hooking the chain, you connect the chain. So hooking here is not appropriate because it implies a noun, and we do not want to have in Simplified English, we do not want to abuse noun words as verbs, neither do we want to abuse verbs and use them as nouns. So these are the little tidbits of knowledge, STE knowledge and information that I will present, and I will need to move on to the next industry. If there are slides that you think you want to examine in more detail, I'll be happy to whenever time permits. So in the third customer example that we are showing, it is a very dedicated team of 7 to 10 writers, not just writers, but it's a mixed bag of translators who do English to Spanish, English to French, English to German translations, and we also have coordinators who are on board the STE movement, because they realize that in order for their business to succeed, they would need to present, not just deliver, not just high quality made in Germany goods, but good solid instructions that are giving Simplified English content that is easy to read, because they have been receiving feedback from customers that the content is very hard to read, very hard to process, blah, blah, blah. And yes, so to really quell that type of chaos, to quell any customer complaint, the best step forward is to simplify the language. So if you see here, once the text is written in STE, even though in this case the text did not decrease in volume, you see that the readability is much better, because the word repeated is not approved. Then we would have to say it is necessary to complete the QC test again. So these are the little tweaks, the little habits and discipline that you need to build for yourselves as a technical writer when onboarding yourselves towards STE writing. And hopefully you would be able to draw some inspiration here from the examples shown. And in the final example here, okay, it has to do with IT. It's a customer that does content management services. They help to manage your information in an intelligent way, and it also helps to create seamless, smart connections across different platforms of the same business, or even across businesses, and try to automate as much as possible those very critical steps that you would be very important for your business. So this is how they have been writing before Simplified English, and this is how they are now writing in Simplified English, where they got rid of some of the non-approved English tenses, like the ing form, which is the present participle tense, so the continuous tense. And of course, they would also hope that by writing in plain English, in Simplified English, it does away with the need for translations. So I did not mention it before, but one of the other benefits of writing in Simplified Technical English is that your content becomes so readable, so manageable, that eventually, unless a European directive mandates, otherwise most people would forego translations and just stay with Simplified English as the only piece of manual writing that they export. So, yeah. So coming back to, again, addressing the question of sustainability, you could derive a few salient points from my presentation. Your content would rewritten content would have a strong and positive impact on the team and on your customers who read them. It is going to eventually result in very substantial, significant cost savings in human and machine translations, especially if we're looking at, unfortunately, a recession and very shocking inflationary rates in the foreseeable future. And this is only a bonus to consider. And of course, in the end, there is efficient content management, reuse of your translations, translation memories, and ultimately, we are working towards self-driven workflow processes. So overall, if you ask me, Simplified English is definitely an investment that pays for itself in the short and long terms. Okay, so I'm just gonna draw your attention to a very nice piece of publication. Although it was first shown in 2007, the content remains very relevant, very appropriate for sharing. So based on, as you know, the Japanese are big on machine translation. So anything that they feed the system, they want it to learn and churn out better translations over time. So you could always access this publication, or if you could drop me a message on my Twitter handle. I'm not so active there. I'm more active on LinkedIn, by the way. So I could also point you to the correct resource. So here, based on a publication entitled The Impact of Controlled Language on Translation Quality and Post-Editing in a Statistical Machine Translation Environment, the authors have found that based on their research, they've shown or proven that the use of controlled language has improved the quality of their machine translations significantly. And given this finding, they expect that by extension, the usage of controlled language will also result in greater productivity in the post-editing environment, in a sort of like a three-way relationship among controlled language, the use of controlled language, MT, machine translation quality, and post-editing, which is very good news for me because I sit more in a role of editing text, and I know that my turnaround time is going only to become shorter because of applying STE rules. When the writers apply STE rules and the engineers also try to do their part in writing an STE. Okay, so how does this all look like in numbers? You would expect text volume reduction, of course, by about 20 to 30%. Your translation costs will also come down. Unique terms, we're expecting like cutting out about 50%, at least 50% of redundant words. Okay. So I will leave a few minutes for questions. So now that we know that Simplified English is indeed a language for all industries, I've also made it a point to bring to your awareness that if you're looking at this slide today, then you should be able to make use of this benefit where if you really would like to put Simplified English to the test, put the solution to the test, you are more than welcome to send us your one-page document from your company, and we will evaluate and rewrite this into STE for you. So this is something that we do with a lot of pride, with a lot of confidence, and we are pretty sure that you will like or be able to benefit from the results of Simplified English writing. And before I end, I would like to leave you with a quote. The most dangerous phrase in our language today and amongst our team members is that we've always done things this way. So if you are prepared to make a change, then the relevance of today's presentation to the future is that the future starts now. It starts now, and of course, with the post-pandemic blues and things like that, we do see that many big businesses are moving towards online learning and having remote teams work together based on a common shared platform of Simplified English understanding. Okay, so I will open the floor for questions.
Okay, thank you, Shumin. The first question is whether you can hear me.
Yes.
Okay. The second question is whether you have access to the Slack channel, because we have like a couple of questions there already, and I would like you to read the questions aloud if possible and answer them as well under talk questions. Yes, this one.
Okay. I wonder if Simplified English is always the solution. That's a very good question. Can it be the silver bullet for all your problems? So here, use it and make all your problems go away. And I mean, it sounds very clear, but dry and emotionless, okay? So let me address the silver bullet question. Can it be a silver bullet question? I will not try to answer that question with a yes reply, because I'm always biased towards my baby, so to speak, and I will leave you to draw conclusions based on the samples, the industry samples that I've shared. Okay, and Lana mentioned that STE sounds very clear, but dry and emotionless, and it can be boring to readers. I think it would be more boring and even painful if you had to deal with badly written text, which is hard to read, and you would have to read it 3 times to exacerbate that pain. So it's to me, I guess I would prioritize simplified, clear, not having to read it again as the best bonus to take home with me from Simplified English. The beauty of English language, sorry Lana, I did not aspire to become a Shakespeare or a poet in any form or function. So I would say that Simplified English the focus of Simplified English is more on practicality. Simplified sounds not as sophisticated and seems that the expertise in linguistics is not important. How to make the language beautiful? I'm afraid I don't have an answer for that, but I would hopefully I hope to be able to convince you to join the site of STE when you submit your samples, and we would be able to take a look together and see how we could make the language easier to read. I cannot guarantee that there will be beauty, but to me, easy to read language is indeed sophistication in its highest form. So moving very quickly from Vaslina, in my experience, using STE, the biggest pain is in losing eloquence. So perhaps it's because people feel very restricted at first, that they are losing so many words that they don't have that confidence to forge ahead with writing anymore. So one of the features that we have in our workshops is to give people a 120-day post-training period where they come back to us for feedback and comments, because this is where we do not want to lose audience. We want people to continue applying what they have learned in STE and to implement it for real. So with the 120-day hard work, like putting in an extra or 4 hours a week of STE writing, I feel that the proficiency levels will be at a very acceptable standard. So that's one thing that I hope I did address. So what are your favorite ways to keep good English level outside of writing? So that implies that when I'm writing, I'm not writing in good English. So you may want to elaborate on this question, and I could still take on this question with my answers post conference.
Yeah, I believe we have time for 2 more questions. Oh, gosh. For 2 more questions from the audience here. I encourage the rest of you to go to our Slack channel and ask Shumin directly there. So just 2 questions, and can you go first?
Yeah.
Sorry.
Okay, so hello, I'm Anu. My question is about the usefulness of STE. I do realize that it's very useful in safety-critical products, but looking at the examples you showed, I would have still improved those texts just using general best practices in technical writing, or, for example, minimalistic approach. So what is the added value that the STE would bring in addition to using, for example, minimalistic approach in with certain products? For example, I don't see the use of STE very useful in software documentation. So what would STE bring to that more?
Well, I would say the core difference between minimalism and STE is that STE has an action plan. It comes with 424 pages of the specification. We break it down into bite-sized information for our audience. And on top of that, there is the idea of a controlled vocabulary. So allow me to quickly show you the example of IT. So I disagree with you completely, Anu, when it comes to, say, STE not adding value to IT documentation. So if you ask or spoke to our Finnish customers, you would see that they have come a long way from writing standard English to writing today in STE. So being hand-holding is a very important process in our training. Hand-holding people, making sure that they are working compliantly with the core dictionary. They would be able to do a lot of rewriting on their own in a highly self-directed fashion. Our role is to give them that confidence to do so in a 2 to 3 day training. And I think that the example speaks for itself. And I do thank you for asking a very good question here. So if you wanted to say that STE, oh, it's just about another form of minimalism, I would slightly disagree there, because it actually falls onto a very solid action plan where the dictionary comes into place. A very, very solid training is important, and that's all I have for your question. Thank you.
Okay, so the last question.
My name is Sedona. I'm a business student from the United States. And my question might be a little different, but in like the business world, when you're communicating through email with different cultures, do you suggest using simple English, or do you think it needs to be a little more informal?
Well, I think it needs to be both at the same time, informal, because you should be concerned about, you should show some concern about colleagues that you work with from time to time to check in on them. And when it comes to addressing the problem or the business issues at work, then the language has to be simplified and to the point. And that's probably where I would also use a little bit of STE. Just an interesting note, I was editing a book on the subject of tea and food pairing, so nothing to do with technical manuals. It has everything to do about eating well, drinking well, living well. And the source text was in traditional Chinese, so applying a little bit of STE, or not ST, I would drop the T, and applying a little bit of simplified English will help to get some very complex, esoteric Chinese ideas across to an English-speaking audience. So that's probably how I would juggle my game.